The morning he left me, I was still making his coffee. I had no idea. I set the mug down in front of him, the navy tie, the calm voice, the rehearsed words, and then 3 seconds of silence that answered every question I had been too afraid to ask for over a year. Is there someone else? It's complicated. I picked up my keys. I grabbed my shoes from the doormat. I drove to the grocery store because I did not know where else to go. I sat in that parking lot for 22 minutes. Engine off, hands in my lap, the grocery list still open on my phone, chicken thighs, shampoo, my son's granola bars, the ordinary continuation of a life that had just ended. I did not know yet about the $86,000 he had already moved. I did not know yet that his mother had known for a year and said nothing. I did not know yet that the man who bought his company, the billionaire who now signed my ex-husband's paychecks, was going to be standing in a hallway one day, offering me coffee, just thinking, not on his phone, just thinking. I did not know any of that. What I knew was this. My marriage was over, my son was 16, and I still had a grocery list to finish, so I went inside and I finished it. And what happened next changed everything, not because a billionaire walked into my life, but because I finally decided to walk back into my own. Stay with me. This story is for every woman who has ever sat in a parking lot and forgotten how to breathe. I see you. This one is for you. This is a story about betrayal, but more than that, it is a story about what happens when a woman stops performing her life and starts actually living it, about the quiet, unglamorous, completely real work of becoming whole again. If this story is already speaking to something inside you, if you have ever sat in a parking lot or a driveway and tried to remember how to breathe, then hit the like button right now. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Subscribe so you don't miss how this story ends. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever stayed too long somewhere you already knew you needed to leave? I read every single one. Now let's go back to that parking lot and let's finish the grocery list together.
She sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes. The engine was off. Her hands were in her lap. The grocery list was still open on her phone. Chicken thighs, shampoo, Miles's granola bars, the kind with the chocolate chips he pretended not to care about but always finished first. She had not touched the list. She was trying to remember how to breathe. The Whole Foods parking lot was busy for a Tuesday morning. A woman in yoga pants loaded paper bags into her trunk. A man argued gently with a toddler about a cookie. A cart rolled slowly across the asphalt and bumped into a silver sedan with a soft, hollow sound. Claire watched all of it. She was 39 years old. She had been married for 14 years. She had a son named Miles who was 16 and smelled like basketball shoes and a body spray he used too much of. She had a house with 3 bathrooms she cleaned herself. She had a husband named Douglas who had told her this morning, over coffee she had made, that he wanted a divorce. He had used the word irretrievably. She'd had to look it up on her phone while he was still talking. Irretrievably, beyond repair, past the point of saving. He said it like he was reading from a memo. His voice was calm, measured. He had clearly rehearsed this. He had probably stood in the shower and practiced it. She could almost hear the draft versions, the edits he made, the softer words he chose so he could still be the reasonable one. He did not reach for her hand. She noticed that. He wore the navy tie, the one with small white dots. She had bought it for their 12th anniversary. She had wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a box with a card she had spent 20 minutes picking out. She remembered thinking that the dots were jaunty. She remembered liking the word jaunty. He wore that tie this morning to tell her their marriage was over. He kept things vague. He used the language of a man who had read an article about how to leave your wife without being the villain. I've been unhappy for a long time. I need to be honest with myself. I think we've grown apart. The things people say when they want to make a catastrophe sound like a weather pattern, like something that just happened, like no one chose anything. She asked one question, just one. Is there someone else? She said. He paused. 3 seconds. She counted. It's complicated, he said. She picked up her keys. Her purse. She grabbed her shoes from the doormat because she had forgotten to put them on. She got in the car and drove. She drove to Whole Foods because she did not know where else to go. Now she sat in the parking lot with the grocery list still open and the engine off, and her hands completely still in her lap. She thought about calling someone. She thought about Petra. She thought about her mother. She thought about her sister in Portland, who she talked to twice a year and probably shouldn't call about this right now. She called her mother. Joanna Reed picked up on the fifth ring. Her voice was groggy. It was 7:40 in the morning. "Mom," Claire said, "he's leaving me." Silence. Then Joanna said, soft and absolutely certain, "Then he's a fool. Come home." Claire did not go home. She went inside and bought the groceries. All of them. Every single item on the list. She stood in the cereal aisle for 4 minutes, holding the granola bars, the ones with the chocolate chips. She put them in the cart. She kept moving. She checked out. She loaded the bags into the trunk. She drove home. She put everything away. She did not cry until she was in the pantry, putting the granola bars on Miles's shelf, and she thought, I am still buying his snacks. I am still doing the next thing, even now, even today. She cried for about 90 seconds, then she stopped. She washed her hands. She made herself a second cup of coffee she did not want. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the navy tie Douglas had left draped over the back of his chair. God, I was so stupid. All the signs were there. That evening, Douglas came home for dinner. He acted completely normal. He passed Miles the salt without being asked. He asked about Miles's geometry test. He ate everything on his plate. He was courteous and unremarkable and absolutely devastating to be in the same room with. Claire watched him from across the table and thought, who is this person? Was he always this person? How did I share a bed with someone for 14 years and not know who he was? After Miles went upstairs, Douglas said quietly, I'd like us to be civil about this. Claire said, I'd like a lot of things, Douglas. She did the dishes alone. The water came out too hot. She did not turn it down. She was loading the dishwasher when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, a text message, 5 words. Your husband is with her now. She stared at the screen. She read the words again, then a third time. She did not reply. She set the phone face down on the counter. She finished the dishwasher. Every glass, every fork, every coffee mug, including the one with the chipped handle, she kept meaning to throw away. Then she picked the phone back up. She typed one word. Who? No answer came that night. She lay on her side of the bed. Douglas was in the guest room. He had said it was to give her space. She knew it was because he had already left in every way that mattered. And she stared at the ceiling. She thought about the morning, the coffee, the navy tie, the 3-second pause. She thought about the signs she had noticed and filed away and not looked at again. The late meetings, the new gym routine that produced no visible results because he was not at the gym, the password on his phone that changed sometime last year, the way he had stopped arguing with her. That was the one she should have caught. Douglas used to argue. He cared enough to push back. At some point, he stopped caring enough, and she had told herself it was growth, maturity, a marriage settling into itself. She opened her phone under the covers. She typed into the search bar, signs your husband is cheating. She already knew all of them. She had known them for a year. She had been building a very careful wall between what she knew and what she was willing to see. 3 times. She locked the phone, unlocked it, locked it again. She did not sleep. The unknown number did not reply. For 3 days, Claire carried the text in her pocket like a stone. She did not show it to anyone. She did not mention it to Douglas. She got up every morning and made coffee and packed Miles's lunch and drove the carpool route and came home and was completely ordinary on the outside. On the inside, she was taking everything apart. The fourth day, Petra Holloway came over without calling first. This was not unusual. Petra had been doing this since they were 22, and it had never once been inconvenient in a way that mattered. She came in through the back door. She put a bottle of wine on the counter, even though it was 10 in the morning. She looked at Claire for a long moment. "Okay," Petra said. "Tell me." Claire told her everything: the kitchen, the tie, the text, the 3-second pause. Petra was quiet for one full beat. That was unusual. Petra was not a quiet person. Then she said, "Honey, I have been biting my tongue for 2 years. Do you want me to stop biting it?" "Yeah, yes," Claire said. "Her name is Tara Voss," Petra said. "She's 26. She models. Douglas met her at a corporate event 18 months ago." 18 months. Claire had been repainting the guest bedroom 18 months ago. She had asked Douglas to help pick the color. He picked gray. She thought it was too dark. They had gone to the paint store together on a Saturday morning and stood in front of the sample cards for 40 minutes. They had compromised on a warm Griga. She had been proud of the way it turned out. She still lived with that color on the wall. While she was choosing Grey paint with him, he had already met someone else. "How do you know?" Claire asked. "A friend of a friend saw them," Petra said. "More than once. I should have told you. I don't know what I thought. I convinced myself maybe it was nothing." Claire nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee. She put it down without drinking it. 26, she said. "Yes." "And she models?" "Swimwear mostly. Her Instagram is public." Claire looked at Petra. Then she picked up her phone. She found Tara Voss in about 45 seconds. The account was public. The photos were exactly what she expected. Tara was stunning, in the way that makes your stomach hurt. Sharp cheekbones, enormous dark eyes. The kind of body that looked like a full-time occupation. Claire scrolled past the modeling shots, past the sponsored posts for supplements, past the vacation photos and the professional headshots. She scrolled further back, 8 months ago. A photo taken in a hospital hallway. Tara looked pale. Her left arm was held carefully against her side. The caption said, "Rough week. Grateful for the people who show up." Comments were turned off. Claire stared at that photo for a long time. She did not know what it meant yet. But it made Tara feel, for the first time, like a human being instead of an idea. She filed it away. That afternoon, on the advice of her mother, Claire called a divorce attorney. Vivian Cross came highly recommended by 2 people independently. She was 55, precise, and had the manner of someone who had heard absolutely everything and was no longer capable of being surprised by any of it. They met in Vivian's office. Leather chairs, a window overlooking the parking garage, a box of tissues on the side table that Claire did not touch. Vivian asked for access to the joint financial statements. Claire gave her everything she had. Bank records, investment accounts, the joint credit card statements going back 3 years. Vivian reviewed them for 2 days. Then she called Claire back. "There's a secondary account," Vivian said. "Your husband has been moving money into it for approximately 14 months. Small transfers, irregular amounts. Harder to track that way. The total is $86,000. Claire sat very still in the leather chair. $86,000. Moved over 14 months, starting right around the time he met Tara Voss at that corporate event. "He was planning this before I knew anything was wrong," Claire said. "Yes," Vivian said, "he was. He sat across from me at dinner every night for over a year, and he was planning this. Yes." Claire looked out the window at the parking garage. A pigeon was walking across the top of a concrete barrier. It walked with complete confidence, like it owned the structure. "What do we do?" Claire asked. "We find every dollar," Vivian said, "and then we make sure he doesn't keep them." There was one more thing. Vivian mentioned it almost in passing. Douglas's company, Hartwell Partners, a mid-sized consulting firm, had been recently acquired. The ownership group was called Whitfield Capital. Claire did not know that name. She did not care about it right now. But Vivian said it again a few minutes later, and Claire found herself repeating it quietly in her mind. Whitfield Capital. She drove home afterward. She took a different route than usual. She drove past the park where she used to take Miles when he was small. She did not stop. She drove slowly past the duck pond and the old wooden playground equipment and thought about nothing specific. She thought about the version of her marriage she had believed in, the story she told herself, the story she told at dinner parties and on Christmas cards, the story she had been living inside of for 14 years. He wasn't the man I thought, but the man I made up. I loved him completely. That was the real marriage, a marriage I had with someone who didn't exist. That was the saddest thought she had ever had. It sat in her chest like a cold stone. Before she pulled out to the parking lot, she said something out loud. No one to hear her, just her own voice in the car. "I'm not crazy," she said. "I know what I saw. I knew it for a long time. I just wasn't ready to know it." She pulled onto the main road. She drove home. She started dinner. Miles came down at 6:30 and ate 2 helpings and told her about a video he had seen that she did not fully understand, and she listened to every word. That night she slept for almost 4 hours. That was more than she had slept in a week. She counted it as a victory. The certified letter arrived on a Thursday. Claire was still in her robe. Miles had already left for school. She was on her second cup of coffee at the kitchen table when the knock came. She signed for it without reading the return address. She sat back down. She opened it carefully, the way she opened everything, because she had always been careful with things. It was from Douglas's attorney. He was citing abandonment. He claimed she had been emotionally unavailable for years. He said the marriage had broken down due to her withdrawal and lack of engagement. He wanted the house. He wanted primary custody. He wanted to frame the narrative before she could. She read it twice. She set it on the table. She finished her coffee. She called Vivian. "He's playing hardball," Vivian said. "He thinks you'll fold. He does this. He reads people. He finds the ones who will go quiet, and he counts on it." "He thinks I'll go quiet," Claire said. "Will you?" "No," Claire said. "Good," Vivian said. "Then don't." 2 days later, Douglas's mother called. Nadine Ashworth was 69 years old and had never once said anything directly when she could say it sideways. She called at 9 in the morning. Claire answered because she still answered family calls out of habit. "Claire, sweetheart," Nadine said. The sweetheart had a weight to it, a careful weight. "I think the best thing for everyone, especially for Miles, is if we handle this with some grace. No lawyers, no drama. Douglas has worked very hard for what he has. I'd hate to see things get difficult." Claire said, "Nadine, your son moved $86,000 out of our joint account." Silence. "I'm sure there's an explanation," Nadine said. "There is," Claire said. "The explanation is that he was planning to leave me while I was still making him dinner for over a year." More silence. Then carefully, with a precision that had clearly been waiting a long time for permission. "Well, I never thought you were quite right for him, if I'm being honest." Claire held the phone. She looked at the kitchen wall. The clock above the stove ticked. "I see," she said. "I don't mean that unkindly," Nadine said. "I just think—" "Goodbye, Nadine," Claire said. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for about 30 seconds without moving. Then she got her keys. She got in the car. She drove to Nadine's house. She did not plan this. She was just in the car, and then she was on the highway, and then she was in Nadine's driveway with the engine off. She rang the bell. Nadine opened the door. She was wearing a pressed blouse and an expression like she had been expecting exactly this. "How long did you know?" Claire asked. "Claire, this isn't—" "How long, Nadine?" "A beat. A long one." "I knew there was someone," Nadine said, "for about a year." "A year, 12 months." Claire had stood in this kitchen for Christmas. She had made deviled eggs for Easter at this table. She had sat in the living room for Miles's 14th birthday when Nadine had thrown him a small party with balloons and a grocery store cake. The whole time, Nadine knew. "And you said nothing," Claire said. "He's my son," Nadine said. "And I was your daughter-in-law for 14 years. Nadine said nothing. Claire looked past her into the kitchen. The refrigerator had a magnet on it, a beach magnet from Hilton Head. 6 years ago, Miles was 10. They had all gone together. Claire, Douglas, Miles, Nadine, and Douglas's aunt. Douglas got badly sunburned on the second day and complained about it the whole drive home. Claire had laughed at him from the passenger seat. Miles had laughed too. It had been one of those annoying, imperfect, completely ordinary, perfect days. The magnet was still there, right next to a coupon for dish soap. Claire looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked to her car. She did not slam the door. She did not say anything else. She got in and drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror. She drove for about 20 minutes before she pulled into a neighborhood she did not recognize and parked on a quiet street. She turned the engine off. She sat there. She thought about 14 years, about the Christmas dinners and the Easter eggs and the birthday cakes. She thought about every Sunday dinner at Nadine's house where she had tried, genuinely tried, to be a good daughter-in-law. She had learned how Nadine liked her coffee. She had always brought flowers. She had listened to the same 4 stories about Douglas's childhood more times than she could count. And Nadine had sat across from her at that table for a year and said nothing. That was a different kind of betrayal. Not hot and sharp like Douglas, cold and quiet, like something that had been waiting. She started the car. She drove home. She pulled into her own driveway and went inside. It was 10:45 at night. Miles was already in his room. She could see the light under his door. She opened the pantry. She pulled everything out. Every can of soup, every box of pasta, every half-used packet of oatmeal, and the rice she bought for a recipe she never made. She lined it all up on the counter. She wiped down every shelf with a damp cloth. She smelled the clean wood smell of the empty shelves. She put everything back in, by category first, then by height. Then she stood back and looked at it. Well, that's something I can control. Miles appeared in the doorway, basketball shorts, hair still messy from sleep. He looked at the pantry. He looked at her. "Mom, it's almost 11. "I know. Are you okay?" She looked at her son. He was 16 and terrified in the way that 16-year-old boys are terrified, which is to say, completely, and working very hard to hide it. "I will be," she said. "I promise." He nodded. He got a glass of water from the tap. He drank it standing at the counter, looking at the reorganized pantry. Before he went back upstairs, he said, "For the record, Dad's being an idiot." She almost laughed. Then she did laugh. A real one. Small, but real. "Go to bed," she said. He went. She finished the pantry. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed and slept for 6 hours straight, which was the most she had slept since the morning with the coffee and the navy tie. "I deserve to be treated better than this. I have spent 14 years making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. That is done now. She said it to the dark. No one heard it. That was fine. She had heard it. That was enough. The discovery phase of the divorce was its own kind of education. Vivian was thorough and efficient and utterly without sentiment, which was exactly what Claire needed. They met twice a week. They reviewed documents. They built a case that was quiet and precise and very difficult to argue against. Douglas hired an attorney named Garrett, who wore expensive suits and specialized in making reasonable women seem unreasonable. Claire had met men like Garrett before. She had smiled at them at parties. She would not be smiling at him now. Miles had started eating dinner at his friend Jake's house 4 nights a week. Claire did not blame him. She kept his shelf stocked with granola bars and said nothing about the dinners. On a Wednesday, a package arrived at the door. No return address. Brown paper, taped neatly. Inside was a printed email thread. 12 pages. The header said, "From Douglas Ashworth to Owen Pratt." Owen Pratt was Douglas's best friend and his closest colleague at Hartwell Partners. They had been friends for 15 years. Owen had been a groomsman at their wedding. He had given a toast that made people laugh and then cry. Claire had thanked him afterward and meant it. She read the email thread standing at the kitchen counter. Douglas had written to Owen 14 months ago about Tara, about his plans, about the money he was moving, his strategy for the asset division, his timeline, his calculations about what Claire would and would not fight for. Owen's reply, in full, "Smart. Lock it down before she gets a lawyer." Claire read that line 4 times. She took a photo of every page with her phone. She sent them to Vivian. Then she called Petra. Petra answered on the first ring. "I need to tell you something," Petra said, before Claire could speak. "I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't, and I'm very sorry." "Tell me," Claire said. "I saw them," Petra said. "Douglas and Tara, together, at a restaurant, about 6 months ago. I convinced myself it could have been work, a client dinner. I know how that sounds. I didn't convince myself very hard. I didn't want to be the one. I was scared of what it would do, and I was a coward." Silence. Claire sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, just... Her legs decided. She sat on the tile with her back against the cabinet and held the phone. "I forgive you," she said finally. "You shouldn't," Petra said. "You're my best friend," Claire said. "You made a mistake. I forgive you. But from now on, honest. About everything. Even the things that are hard to say." "Deal," Petra said immediately. Then, "Okay, starting now. Tara Voss posted something this week. A photo. Her arm is in a sling. And there was a comment on an old post, since deleted, from someone who knew her. The comment said it wasn't her first time getting hurt around him." Claire went very still. She thought about the hospital photo, 8 months ago, the careful way Tara held her arm against her side. Rough week. Comments off. Oh no. She thought about being 26. She thought about meeting someone who was 43 and established and confident and charming in the specific way that men are charming when they have practiced it. She thought about how that could go wrong in ways that would be impossible to predict at 26. She sat on the kitchen floor for another few minutes. Then she got up. She put the kettle on. She made tea she did not particularly want. She drank the whole cup, standing at the sink, looking out at the backyard. She thought about what to do with this information. She thought about whether it was her business. She thought about whether it changed anything. It changed something. She was not sure what yet. "The custody hearing," Vivian said when Claire called her. "It's been moved up. Douglas's team is arguing that you've been unstable, emotionally unavailable. They have a school counselor's report from 2 years ago. Miles went through a rough patch. Grades dipped. They're going to try to use it. Miles went through a rough patch because Douglas was never home, Claire said. I know that, Vivian said. We'll make sure the judge knows it too. The courthouse smelled like recycled air and old paper. Claire wore a gray dress she had bought for a friend's retirement party 3 years ago. She sat beside Vivian and kept her hands flat on the table in front of her. Still and flat. She had practiced this. Douglas sat across the room. He was wearing a different navy tie. Not the anniversary one, a different one. She wondered if he had noticed the significance of the first one, or if he had just put it on without thinking. She suspected the latter. She suspected he had stopped thinking about her a long time ago. The judge asked to speak with Miles in chambers. Douglas's attorney objected mildly. The judge did it anyway. Miles was in there for 11 minutes. Claire counted every one. When Miles came back out, he looked at his mother and gave her the smallest possible nod. Just one dip of his chin. She felt it in her entire chest. The motion for primary custody with Douglas was denied. Douglas's attorney requested a sidebar. Claire looked straight ahead at the wood paneling on the far wall. Outside in the hallway, Douglas found her. He was alone for 30 seconds. No attorneys in earshot. He came close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he had worn for 12 years. She used to find it comforting. He said, very quietly, "You're making a mistake fighting me. I have resources you don't have." She looked at him. This man she had chosen. This man she had reorganized her entire life around. This man who had moved $86,000 and practiced his speech in the shower and worn the anniversary tie. So she said, "Then I'll have to find my own." She walked back to Vivian. That evening, she baked her mother's lemon pound cake recipe. The handwritten card had lived in her recipe box for 15 years. Joanna's handwriting. Loops on the L's, small stars instead of dots on the I's. She measured the flour 3 times because her mind was somewhere else. She burned the first layer, slightly. She cut off the dark part and ate it over the sink. It tasted like butter and lemon and a small mistake. The second layer came out perfectly. She wrapped it and brought it to Miles's carpool the next morning. She did not explain why. He did not ask. He took it and put it in his bag and said, "Thanks, Mom." That was enough. Vivian called that afternoon. The ownership group at Hartwell, Whitfield Capital, is conducting a full audit of company practices, she said. Some of the financial movements in your divorce proceedings may not have been limited to your marital assets. There may be company funds involved. Meaning Douglas stole from his own company? Claire asked. Meaning there's an investigation, and Douglas is the subject of it, Vivian said. He may already know. Claire thought about the text in the parking lot. I have resources you don't have. He did not know yet that his resources were disappearing. Who is Grant Whitfield? Claire asked. Tell me more. Private person, Vivian said. Keeps a very low profile for someone with his profile. Built his first company in his late 20s. Lost everything at 32. Rebuilt from nothing. People who work with him say he's the most honest person they've encountered in business. In his world, is that a compliment or a liability? Claire asked. Vivian paused. Both, she said. Usually both. But Claire had a meeting at the Whitfield Capital building. She was there as a material witness in the financial investigation. Vivian would be present. It was procedural. She was not nervous about it. She had given statements before. She was good at being clear and precise and keeping her voice level. She took the elevator to 14, or she meant to. She stepped off at 12. She knew immediately. The carpet was a different color, dark green instead of the gray on 14, and the reception desk was in the wrong place. She turned back toward the elevator. You look a little lost. The man was standing in the hallway with a coffee cup, not looking at his phone, not reviewing papers, just standing there in the particular way of someone who had given himself permission to stop for a moment, just present, looking at nothing, thinking. She noticed that first, before anything else. He was just thinking. He was tall. She put him at mid-40s. He had the kind of face that was interesting rather than classically handsome. Lived in. A face that had been through things and had not tried to hide it. He wore a suit that fit well and did not announce itself. Wrong floor, she said. Happens, he said. Elevator or stairs? Elevator. Takes about 40 seconds. Coffee while you wait? She almost said no. It was 9:40 in the morning, and she had already had 2 cups, and she was about to go give a deposition-adjacent statement about her cheating husband's financial crimes. Sure, she said. He poured from a carafe on a small table near the elevator bank. He handed her the cup. She noticed he did not ask how she took it. He handed her the cup and the small pitcher of cream separately, which was the correct move. Small thing. She noticed it. What floor? He asked. 14, she said. I have a meeting on 14 in about 20 minutes, he said. He pressed the elevator button. Do you work here? She asked. He said, sort of. The elevator opened. They stepped in, the door closed. He used a key card to confirm the floor. A silver card with a small W embossed on the front. She looked at the card. She looked at him. You're Grant Whitfield, she said. You're Claire Ashworth, he said. You're here about the Hartwell audit. You know who I am. I reviewed the case files, he said. Your attorney is exceptional. She's the reason I still have a house, Claire said. That's a very good reason to have an exceptional attorney. The elevator opened. She stepped off. She almost walked away without another word. Instead, she stopped. Thank you for the coffee, she said. Good luck today, he said. She walked to Vivian's office. She gave her statement. She was clear and precise and kept her voice level. When it was done, she sat for a moment in the conference room after everyone left and thought about the man in the hallway who was not on his phone. 3 days later, the story broke. A business news outlet ran it. Local first, then picked up wider. Hartwell Partners audit. Financial irregularities. Senior partner, Douglas Ashworth, named in the investigation. There was a photo of Douglas from the company website. He looked confident in it. He looked like a man who believed he had the situation managed. Claire saw it shared in the neighborhood Facebook group with commentary. One mother wrote, Poor Claire, but honestly, did she not know? She sat in the school pickup line and read that comment 3 times. Did she not know? She thought about what she knew, and when she knew it, and the very careful wall she had built. She thought about the difference between not knowing and not being ready to know. She thought about how those 2 things look identical from the outside. She put the phone down. Miles got in the car. He tossed his bag in the back. He buckled his seatbelt. People at school are talking, he said. I know. I told Jake Foley that my dad's an idiot. Miles? I stand by it. She pulled out of the pickup line. She did not respond. She did not agree out loud. But she did not disagree either. The office smelled like eucalyptus and something warm. A small white noise machine sat outside the door. The chairs were the kind that invited you to sit back rather than forward. Claire always sat forward. Dr. Beth Calloway was 50 years old and had steady gray eyes and the ability to say nothing in a way that felt like a full sentence. Claire had been seeing her for 6 weeks. She had started because Vivian said it would help the custody case. She kept going because something else was happening in that office. Something she had not anticipated. Beth asked, When did you first know something was wrong? Not suspect. No. Claire opened her mouth. She closed it. She thought about this carefully. She had been asked about Douglas many times in the past weeks. By Vivian, by Petra, by her mother. But no one had asked it quite this way. Not no. Not suspect or worry or have a feeling. No. Miles's 14th birthday party, she said. 2 years ago. Douglas was on his phone the entire time. I asked him to put it away. Just put it away for a few hours. It's your son's birthday. What happened? Beth asked. He looked at me, Claire said. Just for a second, and there was this expression, not anger, not guilt, irritation, like I was inconveniencing him, like I had interrupted something important to ask him to attend his own son's party. And what did you do with that feeling? Beth asked. Claire was quiet for a moment. I planned the rest of the party, she said. I lit the candles, I led the singing, I took the photos, I cut the cake and handed out the pieces and thanked everyone for coming. You managed it, Beth said. I always managed it, Claire said. The words landed differently when she said them out loud. She heard them in a new way. I always managed it. I managed every party and every dinner and every school event and every holiday card and every conversation with Nadine. I managed 14 years of a marriage to a man who was managing his exit strategy, and I told myself the managing was love. Did you feel like you'd been gaslit? Beth asked. I don't know, Claire said. Maybe. He never told me I was imagining things. He just stopped including me in his reality, and I kept performing the marriage, even when the other person had already left. That's a particular kind of loneliness, Beth said. Yes, Claire said. It is. She drove home from Beth's office and pulled into her driveway. She turned the engine off. She sat there for 11 minutes. She had started to notice she did this. Sat in driveways, sat in parking lots, sat in the car, and just let the stillness be around her for a minute. She used to do this when she came home from work in the early years of marriage. She would sit in the driveway for 5 minutes before going inside. She had forgotten about that until now. She had stopped doing it at some point. She couldn't remember when. How many times did I sit in my own driveway trying to prepare myself to go inside my own home? The answer was, too many times to count, and she had not seen it as a sign. She had seen it as a habit. Starting over feels impossible, but staying was worse. I just hadn't admitted it yet. She got out of the car. Owen Pratt, facing his own legal exposure from the email thread, reached out to investigators directly. He provided a full account. Every conversation, every strategy meeting, every email he should not have sent. He gave them dates and amounts and specifics that Douglas had not expected anyone to be able to provide. Douglas's attorney called Vivian 2 days later. He blinked, Vivian said when she called Claire. What does that mean? Claire asked. It means he wants to settle, Vivian said. Now, quickly. How quickly? He suggested this week. Claire was quiet for a moment. What does the settlement look like? She asked. The house, Vivian said. Full custody with generous visitation. A financial settlement that accounts for the hidden assets plus penalties. Health coverage through Miles's college graduation. And his career? Claire asked. That's a separate matter, Vivian said. But Whitfield Capital has made clear that his contract will not be renewed. The investigation is ongoing. His name is in the public record now. Claire looked at the kitchen window. Outside, a bird was sitting on the fence post. Just sitting there, looking at something she could not see. Tell him we'll review the terms, Claire said. That's the right answer, Vivian said. 6 months after the settlement was signed, the house was fully hers. Claire had repainted the guest bedroom. Not Grieg. A deep warm blue she had chosen entirely alone. She stood in the paint store for 20 minutes, with no one else's opinion to consider. It felt like a luxury she had not known she was missing. Her design consultancy had 3 clients, small projects, a kitchen renovation, A home office refresh, a young couple's first apartment, nothing large, but real. Her name on real invoices, money she had earned herself going into an account with only her name on it. Miles was in his junior year. He was taking an elective in architecture and coming home with questions she actually knew how to answer. They had dinner together most nights now. Real dinner, with actual conversation. Vivian called on a Tuesday and asked her to lunch. Not professionally, she specified this. Personally. They went to a small Italian place near Vivian's office. White tablecloths. Bread rolls that arrived warm. Vivian ordered the soup and then looked at Claire with the particular expression of someone about to say something sideways. I want to tell you something outside of attorney-client context, Vivian said. That sounds ominous, Claire said. It isn't. Vivian broke a roll. Grant Whitfield reached out to me. He asked if it would be appropriate for him to contact you. Personally, not professionally. Claire held her water glass. He asked the right way, Vivian said. He asked me first because he was aware you and I had a professional relationship, and he wanted to be sure there was no conflict. He wanted to know if you were in a place where a personal outreach would be welcome. What did you tell him? Claire asked. I told him it was entirely your decision and not something I could speak to, Vivian said. But as a woman who has watched a lot of people go through a lot of divorces, I wanted you to have the information. Claire ate her soup. It was good soup, tomato with basil. She thought about the hallway on the 12th floor, the coffee, the way he handed her the cup and the cream separately, the keycard with the small W, the way he was just standing there, thinking, not on his phone. She called Beth that evening. Someone has expressed interest, she said. He did it properly, through a mutual professional contact. He asked permission before asking. He's not pushy, and I feel completely unprepared. What does unprepared feel like? Beth asked. Claire thought about it. Like I've been renovating a house for a year, she said. Stripping it down, fixing the foundation, repainting everything, and someone just asked if they can come see it. Is the house ready? Beth asked. I don't know, Claire said. The rooms are good, the foundation is solid, but I still find things to fix every week. That's true of every house, Beth said. Silence. The question isn't whether the house is perfect, Beth said. The question is, who are you now? Not who you were in the marriage, not who you were in the worst moments of the divorce. Who are you when you're alone in the house you rebuilt? Claire thought about Sunday mornings with coffee. She thought about the blue bedroom. She thought about the dinner conversations with Miles about architecture. She thought about the 3 clients and the real invoices and the money in her own account. She thought about standing in front of her bathroom mirror 3 nights ago. She had just brushed her teeth. She was about to turn away. Instead, she stayed. She looked at herself for 30 seconds. On purpose. Just looked. She was 39 years old. She had a son who was becoming someone she genuinely admired. She had a house she chose. She had a best friend who showed up even when it was inconvenient. She had her mother's recipe for lemon pound cake that she could make without burning on the first try. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. She had just spent a long time in a space where she was treated like nothing, and she had confused the treatment for the truth. She reached out to Grant, not through Vivian, through a mutual professional contact, a woman who had hired Claire for a design project and knew Grant through industry circles. Claire sent a professional message. She said she would like to have coffee if he was available. No agenda. He replied within an hour. Tuesday at 10. He named a place on Mercer Street. He added, good coffee and no one from Hartwell goes there. She laughed out loud, alone in her kitchen. The sound surprised her. It had been a while since she had laughed at something unexpected. That night, Miles said from the doorway, "Mom, are you dating someone? I had coffee with someone once. We haven't even had it yet." He processed this with the great solemnity of a 16-year-old boy. "Is he decent?" Miles asked. "I think so," Claire said. "Okay." He turned to go, then he turned back. "You deserve decent, Mom, just so you know." She did not cry until he was upstairs. The hardest part was admitting I knew all along. The second hardest part is learning to trust what I know now. But I do know. I know what good feels like. I had forgotten. Now I remember. The coffee on Mercer Street lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. This was not something Claire planned. She had budgeted 1 hour. She had a client call at noon she had mentally reserved as an escape route if needed. She did not need the escape route. Grant Whitfield arrived 3 minutes early. He was already at the table when she came in. He stood when she approached. He asked if the table was all right or if she wanted to move. "More light on the other side," he said, gesturing toward the window. She said the table was fine. He did not perform conversation. He was just in it. He asked about her design work, with the specific interest of someone who actually wanted to know. He listened in a way that made her think he was filing things away, not waiting for his turn to talk. She asked about his company. He answered directly, without the careful modesty that was really just a different kind of performance. He had lost everything at 32. He talked about it without drama. He said it had been the most clarifying experience of his life because it removed everything that had been decorative and left only what was structural. She thought that was one of the most precise things she had ever heard someone say about themselves. "What made you want to rebuild?" she asked. "I didn't want to," he said. "I just couldn't stop. At some point, I realized the not stopping was the answer." She drove home thinking about that, the not stopping. She had been doing that for a year, getting up every day and not stopping. And somewhere in the middle of all that not stopping, she had become someone she recognized again. She was considering this when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Something made her answer. "Is this Claire Ashworth?" The voice was young, careful, precisely calibrated, like someone reading from prepared notes while trying to sound like they weren't. "Yes," Claire said. "This is Tara Voss," the voice said. "I know this is strange. I know you have no reason to hear me out. I needed to say something." Claire pulled into a parking lot. She turned the engine off. She held the phone. "I'm listening," she said. "I want to apologize," Tara said. "Not for the obvious. Not for, not just for that. For not coming to you sooner. When I understood what he was, what he actually was. I was scared, and I stayed too long, and I'm not proud of that, and I didn't have the courage to warn you, and I'm sorry." Claire looked at the parking lot. It was a pharmacy lot. A woman in a yellow coat was loading a bag into a blue car. "How are you?" Claire asked. The question surprised her when she heard herself say it. She had not planned it, but she meant it. A short silence. "Better," Tara said. "I'm better. It took a while." "I'm glad you're better," Claire said. "I read about the settlement," Tara said. "I'm glad you got the house." "Me too," Claire said. "I thought he was different," Tara said. "From men like him. I know how that sounds now. I know exactly how naive that sounds." "It doesn't sound naive," Claire said. "He's practiced at seeming different. He does it very deliberately. You saw what he showed you." A long silence on the line. "Thank you for saying that," Tara said. "I didn't expect—" "Thank you." "Take care of yourself," Claire said. "You too," Tara said. The call ended. Claire sat in the pharmacy parking lot and looked at the yellow coat woman who had finished loading her car and driven away. The space she left was empty and ordinary. Claire thought about the hospital photo, the careful way the arm was held, the comments turned off. She thought about being angry at Tara Voss for a year and a half. She thought about all the energy that had cost her, all the space it had taken up. She put the phone in her bag. Something loosened in her chest, something she had been carrying for a long time. She had not known it was still there until it wasn't. Douglas was not her rival. Tara was not her enemy. Douglas was just a man who had made choices and was now living in them. She did not need to carry him anymore. She put him down, right there, in the pharmacy parking lot. She just put him down. The settlement had been signed 3 months earlier. Vivian had sent a final summary. Everything in order. The house, the custody arrangement, Miles stable, and talking to a school counselor who said he was, in her professional assessment, going to be fine. Douglas had not returned to Hartwell. His contract had not been renewed. The investigation was ongoing. His name appeared in search results in ways that would take years to move past. Claire had not engineered any of this. She had simply told the truth to the right people at the right time and refused to go quiet when going quiet would have been easier. The truth had done the rest. Her life was not a revenge story. It never had been. It was just her life, getting better, getting more like itself. She started the car, she drove home, she made dinner, she and Miles ate together, and he told her about the architecture elective, and she told him about her meeting with the new client, a woman who wanted to redesign her entire home office and had very specific opinions about lighting. "Do you like the work?" Miles asked. "I love it," she said. And she meant it in a way she had not meant it in years, maybe in a decade. She washed the dishes, she dried them and put them away. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed and slept 8 hours straight. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. Now she knew it in her bones. Chapter 9. The Party. The Whitfield Capital Annual Dinner was held in October. It was a formal event. Industry people. A hotel ballroom with good lighting and better food. Grant had mentioned it 3 weeks earlier, carefully, over their second coffee on Mercer Street. He said he would like her to come. He said it without pressure. He said she could decide. She said yes. Petra came over that afternoon. She sat on the edge of Claire's bed and watched her get ready, with the expression of someone trying very hard not to make comments and failing completely. "It's just dinner," Claire said. "He's introducing you to his world," Petra said. "You don't know that." "I absolutely know that. I've known you since you were 22, and I know what a man introducing his world looks like, and this is it." Claire put on her earrings. The small pearl ones her mother had given her. She was wearing navy blue, not to make a statement. She just loved navy blue, and she had been choosing colors for other people's spaces for a year, and she was going to wear the color she loved. She looked good. She knew it. Not in the way of performing looking good, just she looked like herself, finally, completely like herself. Grant met her at the entrance. He said she looked wonderful, directly, without preamble. She thanked him. They walked in together. She met Seth Whitfield within the first 10 minutes. Grant's younger brother was 22, and immediately, effortlessly charming in the way of someone who had probably never had to try very hard and was self-aware enough to find this slightly embarrassing. He asked about her design work with such genuine interest that she talked for 10 minutes about lighting theory and material sourcing before she surfaced and realized she had been monologuing. "Sorry," she said. "I can talk about this a lot." "Please keep going," Seth said. "I was genuinely learning things." She laughed. Across the room, Grant was talking to two men in suits. He looked over. Their eyes met. He raised his glass slightly, just slightly. She raised hers back. She was turning back to Seth when she saw Nadine. Nadine Ashworth was across the room, standing next to a man Claire did not recognize. A business associate, probably. Someone's plus one. She had not been invited by Grant. That was clear from the slight confusion on the event coordinator's face near the door. Nadine saw Claire at the same moment. The expression on Nadine's face was well, it was worth a lot. It was worth the pantry reorganization at midnight and the drives to parks she didn't stop at and the 11 minutes in the driveway. Claire did not walk over. She did not need to. She had nothing to say to Nadine Ashworth. She had said everything she needed to say in the doorway of Nadine's house when she turned and walked away without waiting for an apology that was never coming. She turned back to Seth and said, "You were asking about the lighting project. So the client has this incredible south-facing wall." Douglas arrived 40 minutes later. He was not on the guest list. He had come as someone else's guest entirely, someone who had not known about the investigation or had not known enough. The event coordinator spoke quietly to a colleague. A security person appeared. The conversation with Douglas was brief, professional. 45 seconds. Most people in the room did not notice. Claire noticed. She watched him cross the room toward the door. She watched the security person maintain a courteous but absolute distance beside him. She watched the door close. She felt nothing. Not triumph, not residual hurt, not the complicated chemical mix of anger and grief she had carried for so long. Nothing. A clean, quiet, empty. He is not the story anymore, she thought. He is just a man who made bad choices and is living in them. I don't carry that. She turned back to Seth. Grant had joined them. He stood close to her in the way of someone who wanted to be near her without making it a statement. Seth was telling a story about a renovation gone wrong at one of the company's properties. Grant had apparently been involved. Grant disputed a detail. Seth insisted. Claire laughed at the disagreement, which was mild and clearly a practiced argument between two people who had been doing this for 20 years. She thought, this is what ease feels like. I had forgotten. They had dinner. The food was good. The conversation at the table was easy. No one made her feel like an accessory or a project or a cautionary tale. She was just a person at a table. Claire, the designer, the woman in navy blue who laughed at Seth Whitfield's story. On the way home, Grant drove. They talked about the dinner and about a restoration project in the warehouse district he was considering and about Miles' architecture interest. At her door, he said, "Thank you for coming?" She said, "Thank you for asking." He did not try to extend the evening. She liked that. She liked that he had done this right, all the way through, from the beginning. She went inside. The house was quiet. Miles was at Jake's for the night. She changed out of the navy dress. She hung it carefully. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and thought about the evening. She thought about Nadine's face, about the door closing behind Douglas, about Seth and the lighting theory, about the way Grant raised his glass from across the room. She thought, I am okay. I am actually, genuinely okay. This was not a performance, not a thing she said to reassure herself. Just a fact. A simple, available fact. I am okay. It was a Sunday in November. Miles was in the backyard, raking leaves. He was doing it badly. Large patches missed, the pile in the wrong place for bagging, occasional pauses where he stood and looked at the sky for no discernible reason. Claire watched him from the kitchen window. Coffee in both hands. The morning light came through the glass in the particular November way, golden and low. Grant was at the kitchen table. They had not made announcements. They were not at a stage that required announcements. He was at the table on a Sunday morning with a tablet and his own coffee and an unhurried quality she had come to recognize as his natural state. He was not performing relaxation. He was just relaxed. He looked up from the tablet and glanced out the window. Miles is not a very skilled raker, he said. He knows, Claire said. He doesn't care. That's a completely valid approach to raking, Grant said. I think so too, she said. She refilled her coffee. She leaned against the counter and looked at her kitchen. The pantry she had reorganized at midnight. The recipe cards tucked into the holder on the wall. The small blue vase on the windowsill she had bought at a street market last spring because she liked the color. The window with the November morning coming through it. This is the house I stayed for, she thought, and now it's mine, Miles's and mine. And on Sunday mornings, Grant's. That's enough. That is genuinely, completely, deeply enough. She thought about the parking lot. 22 minutes. Engine off. The grocery list on her phone. Chicken thighs, shampoo, Miles's granola bars with the chocolate chips. She had sat in that parking lot, not knowing how to breathe. She had not known, in that moment, if she was going to be okay. She did not have evidence. She did not have a plan. She just had the grocery list and the terrible knowledge that her marriage was over and the completely bewildering fact that life was going to continue regardless. So she had gone inside. She had gotten a cart. She had gone up and down the aisles and put things in the cart. Chicken thighs, shampoo, the granola bars. She had checked out. She had loaded the bags. She had driven home and put everything away. She had done the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next one after that. One ordinary thing at a time, through an extraordinary year. And she was here, in this kitchen, on this Sunday, with this coffee, with her son raking badly in the backyard and the man at her kitchen table who handed her cream separately and raised his glass from across a room. Miles came in through the back door, stamping his feet. He pulled off his gloves. He looked at the coffee maker with great intention. You can have half a cup, Claire said. I was going to make a whole cup, Miles said. Half, she said. He made half a cup. He leaned against the counter beside her and looked at Grant. The pile is in the wrong place for bagging, Grant said, looking at the yard through the window. I know, Miles said. Do you want help moving it? Miles considered this. After coffee, he said. After coffee, Grant agreed. Miles went back to his room with his half cup. The house was quiet. November light. Coffee smell. The soft sound of the neighbor's dog somewhere down the street. Claire sat down across from Grant. He looked up. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Just thinking. Good thoughts? He asked. Really good thoughts, she said. She had not been rescued. She needed to be clear about this. She had not been swept up or saved or solved. She had been broken open, and she had put herself back together with her own two hands. She had done it in parking lots and driveways and midnight pantries and therapy offices and courthouse hallways and a dozen ordinary moments that added up to a life rebuilt from the inside out. Vivian had been part of it. Beth had been part of it. Petra, finally honest, had been part of it. Miles, in his basketball shorts, at 11 at night, had been part of it. Joanna, answering on the fifth ring, had been part of it. And then, when the structure was already solid, when the foundation was already real, then Grant had walked into the story. Not to rescue her, just to be there, just to be someone worth being around because she had finally become someone worth being. That was the part she wanted to remember, not the betrayal, not the $86,000, not the navy tie, or the certified letter, or Nadine's face at the party. The part worth remembering was the grocery list, the pantry at midnight, the drive home from Beth's office, the son in the doorway who said you deserve decent, Mom, the 30 seconds in front of the bathroom mirror, the not stopping. That was the story. Everything else was just weather. 3 months later, Miles turned 17. The house was full, in the particular way of a good birthday. Loud and slightly chaotic and warm, Petra was there, louder than everyone, and in the best possible way. Joanna had driven up from Richmond and was already in the kitchen claiming territory. Seth Whitfield had come because Miles had, apparently, decided they were friends, which had happened gradually and then all at once in the way of all real things. Grant helped hang the lights on the back porch. He had bought a string of simple white lights and a ladder, and he did it without being asked, going up and coming down and adjusting the placement until it looked right. Miles supervised from the ground with a level of authority that was not earned, but was absolutely committed. The lemon pound cake was on the counter. First try. No burned layer. They brought it out at the end of the evening. Grant carried it with both hands, carefully, the way you carry something that matters. He set it on the table in front of Miles and said, "Your mother made this without burning it. Apparently that's the performance standard." Miles said, "First try is always fine. It's the second try that gets her." "Miles," Claire said. Everyone laughed. She laughed. She stood at the edge of the back porch with the white lights above her, and her mother inside, and her son at the table, and her best friend already taking too many photos, and she thought, this is the life, right here, right now. The specific, ordinary, completely irreplaceable moment. She was 39 years old. She had been discarded by a man who believed she was the lesser part of a trade. He had measured her against a 26-year-old model and decided she came up short. He had moved $86,000 and rehearsed his speech and worn the anniversary tie and believed he was the one with the resources. He had been wrong about all of it. She had rebuilt herself, not in spite of what happened, but through it. She had learned, finally, the difference between keeping the peace and choosing it. She had learned that love looks like being handed the cream separately, that honesty sometimes arrives late but still counts, that the people who show up, really show up, are worth more than all the people who perform showing up. She had learned that victory does not always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like a Sunday morning, a badly raked yard, half a cup of coffee, November light through the kitchen window. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply stay in your own life. Show up for yourself the way you showed up for everyone else. Put the groceries away. Make the pound cake. Reorganize the pantry. Sit in the driveway for 11 minutes and then get out of the car. She had worn a mask for a long time. The perfect wife. The calm one. The one who managed. The one who made the deviled eggs at Easter and thanked the groomsmen and planned the rest of the birthday party. That mask was gone. What remained was something rougher, realer, a little worn at the edges and better for it. She wore it like she had always known it fit. Because she had always known. She had just needed a very bad year to remember it. Miles blew out the candles. Everyone cheered. The white lights glowed above the porch. Claire Ashworth stood in her own backyard, in her own life, wearing her own face. And she was home.
She did not win because a billionaire fell in love with her. I want to say that clearly, because that is not the lesson. That is not what this story is about. Claire won the moment she went back inside that grocery store. The morning everything fell apart. When her hands were shaking and her heart was broken and she still picked up the cart and went up and down those aisles and put the granola bars in the cart because her son liked the ones with the chocolate chips. That was the moment. Not the courtroom, not the settlement, not the dinner with the white lights and the man who raised his glass from across the room. The moment was the grocery list. Because here is what no one tells you when your life falls apart. They tell you about strength, they tell you about rising, they tell you about glowing up and moving on and becoming the best version of yourself. And all of that is real, but none of it starts with a grand gesture. It starts with the next thing. It starts with finishing what you were already doing, even when your world has just collapsed underneath you, even when you are sitting in a parking lot for 22 minutes trying to remember how to breathe. You get up, you go inside, you do the next ordinary thing, and then the next one, and the one after that. That is how you rebuild a life, not in one dramatic moment, in 100 quiet ones, in the midnight pantry reorganization. In the drive home from therapy, when you sit in your own driveway for 11 minutes and then get out of the car, in the pound cake that burns the first time and comes out perfectly the second, in the son who appears in the doorway in basketball shorts and says, "You deserve decent, Mom." Just so you know, that is where the real story lives, in those small, specific, completely human moments. And here is what Claire learned, what the story is really asking you to consider. How many masks are you wearing right now? The perfect wife, the calm one, the one who manages, the one who keeps the peace because keeping the peace feels like love. How long have you been performing a version of your life instead of living it? How many times have you sat in your own driveway preparing yourself to go inside your own home? Because here is the truth that this story holds. You are allowed to take the mask off. You are allowed to be the rough, real, slightly imperfect version of yourself who burns the first layer of the pound cake and cries for 90 seconds in the pantry and says out loud in an empty car, "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I deserve better than this." That version of you is not less. That version of you is more honest, more alive, more worth knowing. And the people who matter are the real ones, the Petras and the Joanna Reeds and the Miles Ashworths of your life, that they are not waiting for the perfect version. They are waiting for the real one. You do not need to be rescued. You are already in the process of rescuing yourself. Every time you tell the truth, every time you go back inside and finish the grocery list, every time you choose, quietly and without fanfare, to stay in your own life instead of disappearing into someone else's idea of who you should be. That is the victory. Not the house, not the settlement, not the tidy ending where everything is resolved and the right man is at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. The victory is the Sunday morning itself. The November light through the window, the coffee, the sun raking badly in the backyard, the life that is yours, fully, finally, completely yours. Douglas Ashworth thought he was leaving behind someone who was less. He left behind someone who was just getting started. And that is the story worth telling. Final closing line. Editorial disclaimer. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the intention of bringing you stories that carry meaning, healing, and real human value. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We will see you in the next story.